relative to trying to figure out whether the stratigraphic record, fossil record, right, is plausible or not, the way evolutionists or geologists present it, has to do with just a careful examination, what they're saying and what they observe. The only chronometric scale applicable in geologic history for the stratigraphic classification of rocks and for dating geological events exactly is furnished by the fossils. This is what this author is saying. Schindwolf. Owing to the irreversibility of evolution. Wow. Because you assume this, you don't prove it now. It hasn't been proved that evolution is irreversible. Because it's so inconsistent, we don't know which way it's going. They offer an unambiguous timescale. It's wholly ambiguous, untrustworthy, not unambiguous, timescale for relative age determinations and for worldwide correlation of rocks. Worldwide, wow! Throughout the world, there's so many contradictions wherever you go in this rock strata fossil record thing that it's a joke. In other words, the geologic and fossiliferous formations in real life hardly ever conform to the falsely fabricated geologic timetable of the evolutionist that appears in so many textbooks. Look around the world. Textbooks are totally wrong. So they resort instead to arbitrary and false assignments of specific ages to specific fossils without any proof, never considering the possibility that all life forms were created in the beginning. They had to rule that out. Why couldn't they just be all there? And then some water, called the worldwide flood, and other floods, local floods, move things around, and other events move things around. The basis for the apparent great strength of the present system of historical geology is here clearly seen. Provision is made ahead of time for any contrary evidence that might be discovered in the field. The geologic time sequence has been built up primarily on the tacit assumption of organic evolution, which theory in turn derives its chief support from the geologic sequence, thus presented as actual, but not real, historical evidence of the process. Fragments of the sequences thus built up often appear legitimately superposed in a given exposure, but there are never more than a very few formations exposed in any one locality, occupying only a small portion of the geologic column. So they pick and choose here. Maybe they discover more, but they don't publish more because there's too much to explain. All the contradictions. Formations from different localities are integrated into a continuous sequence almost entirely by means of the principle of organic evolution. So they try to kind of squeeze everything together and say, this is all consistent, it's always this way everywhere. And when, as frequently occurs, strata are found superposed, out of place, but with the fossils in the inverse order, inverse order, this paradox is resolved by saying that the strata must have been inverted through faulting or folding or uplifting or something, whether or not there is any physical evidence thereof. They just say it. Well, if there's no evidence, you can't conclude either way. When superposed strata are found with intervening systems missing, this is explained by the assumption of a corresponding period of erosion rather than deposition, which takes over a period of time. This neatly packaged system of geologic interpretation has the effect of making it practically impossible ever to dislodge it by any amount of contrary evidence. Doesn't matter. They just make up something new. The claim is merely made by evolutionists that it is possible to interpret geology in terms of slow processes acting over long periods of time. Not that it is necessary to do so. One may, in fact, read at length in Lyell and words of the other early uniformitarian geologists without finding more than essentially this claim. Uniformitarianism, in other words, has simply been assumed, not proved. That's great. So, and then you have explanations that you make up. Some of them just totally implausible. Catastrophism has simply been denied, not refuted. Nothing happens quickly. But as a matter of fact, it is not even true that uniformity is a possible explanation for most of the Earth's geological formations, as any candid examination of the facts ought to reveal. Now, here's a presupposed geologic timetable. Presumed main divisions and events of geologic time. This doesn't want to underline or not. I guess it doesn't. Okay. Now we have these Cenozoic, era, Quaternary, all these numbers, all fiction. How do you know? So many exceptions throughout the world when you look at different areas. Now the presupposed continued, Paleozoic, 200 million to 500 million. Well, that's a big stretch. You want to count that down to a few years? No. So there it is. Let's look at the next. All the way down and see what's next. K29. Here's the next page, K29. Continue on. Evidence, physical evidence, worldwide flood. Earth flooded by subterranean waters and torrential downpour. That's the evidence we're looking at. Introduction. Now this proves out that maybe a worldwide cataclysmic flood had something to do with the way the Earth appears today. That's what I maintain. We have fossil record at the top of mountain ranges all over the world. Marine fossils. How'd they get there top of Mount Everest? Maybe there was water up there. And the mountains could have been uplifted as well. But not all over the place all the time. Anyway, let's look. The expression, the fountains of the great deep burst open in Genesis 7:11 points to unmistakably to vast geological disturbances that are incompatible with the local flood concept, especially when these disturbances are said to have continued for 5 months. Now, a lot of times you say, well, there must have been a flood here, water here, because we have marine fossils all over the place here. And it's, well, maybe there's a worldwide flood. No, it's always local. It's always local. So, Genesis 7:11 to 12 and 24. This is kind of looking at the Bible to see if there's anything historically plausible. 600th day of Noah's life, second month, 17th day of the month. Same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. The floodgates of the sky were open, so there were subterranean caverns. And the rain fell upon the earth 40 days, 40 nights. And the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. According to Brown, Driver, and Briggs, Cuba Dictionary, the word tehom, translated deep in this verse, has the primary meanings of deep, of subterranean waters, sea, and the primeval ocean deep. There can be little question, then, that the phrase great deep points back to the deep, Genesis 1:2, and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, water, and refers to the oceanic depths and underground reservoirs of the antediluvian pre-flood world. Presumably, then, the ocean basins were fractured and uplifted sufficiently to pour waters over the continents in conjunction with those waters which were above the firmament, the expanse, up in the air, and which poured down through the windows of heaven. The scriptures state that this breaking up of the fountains of the great deep continued for a period of 5 months, for it was not until after the 150 days had passed that the fountains of the deep were stopped. Such vast and prolonged geologic upheavals and in the oceanic depths cannot be reconciled with the theory that the flood was merely a local inundation in some part of the Near East. Instead, this biblical information gives substantial support to the concept of a geographically universal deluge. A lot of people have opinions on this. So we have seen that most of the Earth's crust, up to and including some of the so-called Proterozoic strata, was probably formed during the period of creation. Also, there must have been a primeval mantle of soil supporting the luxuriant plant life of the antediluvian Earth. During the relatively brief period between the fall and the flood, the worldwide flood, the deluge, however, probably a few deposits were formed, and those that were formed were most likely swept away by the waters of the worldwide flood, together with the original soils and other unconsolidated materials. And it is highly probable that many of even the primeval crustal rocks were broken up, swept away, and mixed, and eventually redeposited by the tremendous hydrodynamic forces of the floodwaters. We're talking about a mile high or more of water, as well as by the volcanic and other phenomena accompanying them. Volcanoes, earthquakes, worldwide flood. Seems to me, I think, remember, a number of volcanoes were there. We have records of them all over the earth, the geologic discoveries and so on. And we have a number of volcanoes occurring at the same time. All that water comes down all over the world. The Noachian deluge was a cataclysm of absolutely enormous scope and potency, and must have accomplished an immense amount of geologic work during the year in which it prevailed over the Earth. Many of the Earth's present rock strata must have been produced by the flood with a huge amount of water. What is it, 60 some odd pounds per cubic foot of water, a mile high? It's going to make soil or small rocks or whatever into huge rocks, granite and other rocks, with all that unbelievable weight, power. Even the relatively trivial floods of modern experience exert tremendous erosive and tractive pulling forces. Sir Cyril Fox, Director of Geological Survey of India and a man of long experience with floods and their effects, this is what he says. The astonishing power exerted by a flood of rushing water, both in scouring and in transporting material, is rarely fully appreciated even today. Sir Cyril quotes from a striking account of floods in northeast India. P.D. Odom has given a brief description of the carrying power of flood streams in the Cherrapunji, Assam region, which is subject to heavy rain. He wrote, the wearer had risen only the water had risen only 13 feet above the level at which it had stood a few days previously. The rush was tremendous. Huge blocks of rock, measuring some feet across, were rolled along with an awful crashing almost as easily as pebbles in an ordinary stream. Power of water. In one night, a block of granite, which I calculated to weigh upward of 350 tons, was moved for more than 100 yards, while the current was actually turbid with pebbles of some inches inside, suspended almost like mud in the rushing stream. Power. In that region there now is practically no soil on the Cherrapunji Plateau, and it is also noticeable that water carrying much mud in suspension and its increased density therefrom carries larger stones than clear water for equal velocities. One must visualize flood actions like this not in limited locale but worldwide, but not for a few days or hours, but continuing for weeks and months to appreciate the character of the biblical deluge. On the other side of the world, from Utah, it comes an account of another modern flood. On this area, the 1930 floods destroyed houses, broke in the east wall of the schoolhouse, and deposited debris to a depth of several feet, including boulders of all sizes up to 20 tons in weight. Some larger boulders were moved about 1,000 feet from the canyon's mouth down a 4-foot gradient. Several of these weighed from 75 to 100 tons each.